Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker with Terrible and Home Care. I'm very glad you're joining us because if ever there is a bit of a flashback for us and for me to maybe go back to something that's similar to what our self-help segments used to be, is very exciting today because we get a chance to spend some time with a wonderful friend and colleague, Karen Schilling, LCSW, recently retired.
The nicest job title, maybe not ever, but really good.
And you know, it's really interesting to be retiring and experiencing this change right now because we get a chance to talk about new beginnings and new adventures and kind of parallel that. Let's talk about how this came to be in your mind about why this was important to talk about.
Well, one thing is that around this time of the year, as school is getting ready to start, I've never been involved as a professional in the school system, but I've had family members who we often, help to get back to school, teachers, others, nieces and nephews, and my own child going back to school. But I was reflecting on how exciting it was. I mean, I know a lot of times the kids are not always ready to be back at school, but I reflected on my own experience where it was an exciting time for us going school shopping, getting school shoes. My mom made all of our clothes and always had a couple of brand new outfits, not just a couple, several new outfits to wear. We always got a fresh haircut. Now, she was the one that cut the hair.
Okay.
Now, she was a master seamstress. She could cut straight lines. She could sew beautifully. But cutting the hair of four young children, girls who didn't want their hair cut, much less by their mother, and then one boy who always had crooked bangs too, she couldn't do that. And I think it had a lot to do with us not wanting our bangs cut.
Right.
But when I thought back about, the anticipation, the excitement that created for us to get started with something new. And with it being back to school, think about the changes that are going on this week and have been going on for the last few weeks as parents have been getting ready, send their children back to school. Teachers have been getting ready to go back. For, maybe having trouble letting go of the summer, but also having some excitement too about the new adventures that are going to be made in this coming school year.
And for this particular school year, the kids are hopefully coming out of COVID, as we kind of see those numbers kind of ebb and flow, but coming out of COVID and coming back from Ida. So in a lot of ways, it's a new adventure where the school looks different.
I think everything's going to look different for children and for teachers this year, and even other workplace environments, because, we've been in a lockdown situation where we've been so isolated. Just last week, you and I attended a social work conference, and I don't think I really had the understanding of the magnitude of what it was like to be isolated from the professionals that I'd used to see once a month at our monthly meetings. The conference was excellent, but they could have read out of a phone book, and I think a lot of us would have been so happy because we were back in a learning environment, back in what seemed to be normal. And even though that's normal, it's been such a change from what we've experienced and the trauma that we've been through in the last 3 years.
Right. Yeah. And especially when that comes with some anticipated big changes.
Exactly.
Anticipated big changes. I got a chance to talk to Philip Martin some and a chance to talk to David Boudreaux some. And as those guys retire, they're just giddy. They're just giddy with every day is Saturday, except for Sunday.
It really is wonderful. I'm recently retired, as you
Right?
said, and while not every day is Saturday for me, I do have a little bit of a routine, but I am enjoying the idea of the freedom, the choices that I can make or not make, or that I can just say, well, I'll do that tomorrow. Today, something better has come, at least what I consider to be better today.
Like the option to come on and spend this time on
Absolutely.
HTV and sharing with all these wonderful people at home about that. But I like the idea that we're going to get a chance to parallel a little bit this perspective of change and base it on some of the things that we learned very early on in social work and in psychology about kind of understanding what it's like to go through some of these changes and stages in life, and some really great
Exactly.
comparisons with that. You know, it's interesting as we kind of wrap up this particular segment. It's interesting to me, and something that I've learned. Father Willie Todd came on for many years with when it was a self help segment. He came on and spent time talking about how we understand this grief process. And Elizabeth Kubler Ross, you and I got a chance to go. Did you go to listen to her speak in
I
Baton
did
Rouge?
not.
I got a chance to listen to her speak. It was remarkable in Baton Rouge,
Yeah.
back when we were working near or at the hospital or somewhere near then, and listen to her talk a little bit about those 5 stages of grief. And it's interesting that I think some of the newer information and studies talk about the fluidity of
Right.
that more so than just stages.
And you talk not just about grief and dying, but the stages of change. It's they've really broadened that. She did a lot of her work with death and dying,
Right.
but so much of what she described can be used in the cycle of change, the momentum of change, which as I was thinking about today and thinking about retirement and reading some of the things that I've been reading about retirement and activities and things like that, it really fits so well. It's not just about, at this stage of my life, I'm not thinking about dying, but I am thinking about, I am doing some surveying about what I've done in the past, and evaluating, have I been successful? Have I felt fulfilled? What else do I have left to give? And that's a lot of what her work is all about as well.
Changes and talking about letting go a little bit. And quite frankly, we've had some people help educate us about that. You know, it's kind of interesting. We start at the end, right? We talk about Elizabeth Kubler Ross at the end, and a lot of her stuff, like you said, was on death and dying. But there's a lot of grief and loss work throughout our lives.
I think anytime we are faced with any type of change, the letting go process is so hard because we know that whether it's bad for us, whether it's healthy for us, whatever, when we need to let go of something, we're faced with a bit of the unknown, and it can definitely kind of provoke, I guess, some grieving or some sense of loss for us that we have to figure out how we're going to deal with it.
And as Elizabeth Kubler Ross used to talk about the 5 stages, and I think very often people confuse stages with something linear. And the
Right.
stages are not. As we talked about that fluidity, we go through those stages all the time. And so,
In and out
right,
and repeat some of those, because I think, again, as we recognize that none of this is linear, we don't finish a phase
right.
and then done with it and then move on to the next one. We are human beings that have, memories can, provoke us to have certain responses to those particular memories or experiences, whatever. And we may have done a really good job at dealing with some of it, and maybe there's some other work that we need to do to kind of figure out what else needs to be done. That's the thing about grieving is that some people say, it seems like today, it's happening to me today, and it was 20 years ago, and
Right.
then tomorrow we're able to do the same, maybe the same thing, and we don't have the same provocation or the same reaction to that memory or whatever it is
Same
that
impact.
brought us back to that place.
Yeah, we're never really sure what those triggers are. Triggers can be so very interesting, and we talk about that with loss. But those 5 stages, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are those the general terms. But the 5 stages considered the spiral staircase by Linda Pastan is really interesting because it talks about how we go up and down those, depending upon triggers, depending upon what day it is, depending upon what we're doing, what we're going through. And so all of those things kind of change a bit for us in different times.
Exactly. And with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, they often talk about it as a curve now. It's a much more like a pendulum that swings, and then we have different responses to the different things, the different phases and steps and stages of grief that she described.
Right. And a lot of that is based on some of the history that we have. Looking at another theory, Eric Erickson's. Let's talk a little bit about those stages of development.
Well, Eric Erickson basically described human development from the age of a very young child, from birth to, I'm not sure
One.
exact, to
Birth to one.
one, where the major goal of that particular age span was learning trust versus mistrust. And there's a lot of bonding with parental figures, with love, nurturing, caring, that kind of thing. The foundation, I guess, that kind of sets us, and the lack thereof, which can also set us for life through various 8 other stages.
Right.
And what I find very interesting that as I've entered retired life, I'm in that 7th stage of generativity versus
Stagnation.
stagnation, which I really hate that word, but
Well, that's
it's
the opposite of it,
yeah,
right?
right. And so I hope that, hopefully all of us have had that very good base of trust that was developed and that, like, those growing up years getting ready for school, have a lot of fond memories that I think that, there were definitely some positives that encouraged us in all these years that we got ready to go back to school, so that we had that nurturing, bonding, crooked hair start to school. But none of us grew up really badly with those crooked bangs, but it set us sort of for life. And that even though there were tragedies, and even though there were times that things were not really good with deaths or other environmental circumstances that might have come our way,
Loss.
the various losses. I think, we were prepared in a way to deal with that. And then with retirement now, that generativity stage goes from like age 25 to age 64. That is
It's a huge range,
and
right?
it's called middle adulthood.
Right.
And I'm really happy that I'm still in the middle adulthood phase. But I would argue that now, Eric Erickson, I don't know if he's still alive or not, but you might want to reconsider that, because even at 65, people are not necessarily moving into that next phase of development with despair
Right.
or,
Right. Or frustration,
yeah.
or not being happy or pleased, or looking back at that. Speaking of the beginning, my niece gave birth to her first child today.
Awesome.
Declan came into the world this morning at 6 a.m. And it was interesting because everybody talked about the importance of skin to skin. And that's a very important
It
part of
is.
the birthing process. Of skin to skin is the first adaptation that a young child, a child at birth, gets to feel trust with the mother. And there are reasons and steps. And so it's interesting, very Ericksonian, that they do that with mothers, getting them to breastfeed early. Those kinds of things make a difference. And so it matters early on. And so those steps and reaching some of those stages effectively, much like starting school, whatever the crooked haircut may be or not, and the excitement allowed you to adapt later on if in fact you met the goals of that first stage. You're talking about the importance of realizing how change happens and how we can somehow master it. And Eric Erickson was really unique because he said that at each stage we're going to have some conflict. But he also believed that a sense of competence motivates behaviors and actions. And he said that if the stage of each of those 8 stages is handled well, this person will feel a sense of mastery, which is sometimes referred to as ego strength or ego quality. And if that stage is managed poorly, then sometimes that patient will have some grief or some stress with that. But like we were talking about birth and being able to do that well, getting to the end of life should be about mastery, right? And what we
Absolutely.
master.
And I think that by and large, not only are we influenced by our parents to achieve that sense of mastery, but we have so many other people in our lives, teachers and mentors and coworkers, who help guide us to that place, that give us the feedback, that sense of accomplishment and everything that we have. And I think that by and large, people are mostly extremely well mastered in their own lives and they're bosses of their own universe.
with ego strength. And it's really interesting. I think very often you and I, in the work that we've done, mostly with geriatrics and seniors, we talk to people and about people, and doing life review is pretty normal. But I like Hunter Thompson's perspective on looking at life at the end, and I'll quote him from The Proud Highway. He said, "Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, 'Wow, what a ride.'" And so, based on that idea, it's wonderful to think about going into retirement with a plan and also with some excitement.
Exactly. Since I'm recently retired, one of the main focuses of my life in the last few years was, financial, stability. Will I have enough money to be able to live a retired lifestyle that I choose, to maintain? I think I'll be able to be very okay with that. And then the big question is, well, what are you going to do in your retirement? Surely you're going to go back to work. Sure, you're going to do something else. And I think that what I have done and what I see a lot of people do, is make a plan, but just kind of take it easy for a little while. Some people sell their vehicles, they're buy an RV, they sell their homes, and they move, and they are traveling for the rest of their lives. But that's sort of what the first phase and stage of a retirement is that you go, woo, like Thompson says, I'm done, been there, done that. Now I can just decide to do what I want to do.
Well, I think we should give your perspective on that
Right.
quote instead of his. So I'll share that if that's okay. Karen Schilling's perspective on the Proud Highways quote says, "Work should not be a journey of retirement with the intention of arriving safely in an attractive and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in sideways, chocolate in one hand, wine in the other, body thoroughly used up and totally worn out and screaming, 'Woohoo, what a ride.' The greatest adventure of renewed self-discovery begins now." Let's talk about
Absolutely.
the self-discovery and maybe how to go about doing that well.
I was invited to participate in a Facebook group on with people that have recently retired or were getting ready to retire, and they're all asking the same kinds of questions or making the same kind of comments that I've been making the last couple of years. Every time I ran into anybody that I knew was retired, I would say, "What do you do in your retirement? What are you doing now?" And they say, "Well, a lot of people say, well, I still get up at a reasonable time, but I read, I sew, I watch a few movies. I do what I want to do. I go out to eat, whatever." And so it's like I have all these little collections of stories that people have told me about what they do in their retirement. So I joined this little group, and my retirement so far I've taken one little trip. I bought LSU baseball tickets to spend the season in Baton Rouge at the box. And when the season was over, I was like, okay, what next? And I didn't have to worry too long because a friend called and said, "Hey, I have a little part-time job. Maybe you'd like to do something during the summer." So I ended up doing that. And so now it's kind of taken me to this point. So I did realize during that little part-time job that perhaps maybe I jumped into that a little bit sooner than I wanted to be getting up and moving. Thoroughly enjoyed that little job,
Right.
but I thought, yeah, I want to get through the vacation of retirement, and that's usually the first phase of retirement. It lasts about a year, and it's where your main word is freedom. I don't
Okay.
have to do that.
If I can choose to or
Yeah,
choose not to.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Choice is
Right.
what you have there.
Got about a minute left to finish those.
Okay. And then that certainly goes away a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
then that's when you get hit with, oh my gosh, I miss my friends. I've been vacationing so long. So it's the
Social.
need to connect, the need to be kind of connecting with other people, and hanging out with them again. Um, and then the next phase is the trial and error part of thing is, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to see how I like to do this. I've never
See
done
how it
this before.
fits.
See how it fits with no emotional or major attachment to it. Just see how I like to do it. And then the last thing is about giving back to others, that servant leadership, that that I've been involved with a lot in my life.
Your whole career.
But am I still able to give back in the ways that are meaningful for me after you've kind of going through all these things? Erickson and Kubler-Ross definitely resonated big time with me when I was hearing this man, Dr. Moynes, give a little bit TED talk about this, and it was hilarious, but boy, it rang so true. So I look forward to figuring it out and encourage other people to figure it out too on their own time.
And so letting go and being able to make a difference is up to you. And that is however you'd like to do that. We thank you for joining us here this Bayou Time. Don't go anywhere. A lot more local programming here on HTV.